We'll be going live imminently. I'm just waiting for the nod from Twitter services and then. Oh, I have a comment, which I'm assuming. Yes, we are now live. Okay, well, welcome to this meeting of the Local Government Pension Scheme Pension Board. Do I have any declarations of interest? I'll take silence to be no. Okay, moving on then to item 1, which is the...
Chairman,
Sorry?
Chairman, could I interrupt, Chairman? Could we just ask the members of the board to introduce themselves so the public know who is here?
Of course, I do apologise. Yes. Therefore, can I ask members of the board to introduce themselves? I suggest we do it in the order on the order paper that I've got, which starts with Jolyon. Are you there?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Chair. I'm Jolyon Adam. I'm the Academy's rep.
Sarah?
Good morning. I'm Sarah Ansell. I'm an employer representative from the University of Hertfordshire.
Thank you. Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Mitchell, County Councillor in Broadwater and Stevenage and Deputy Chair of this committee. Thank you.
On to the member reps. Gail? Gail Johnson, are you here?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I'm Gail Johnson. I'm a retired accountant and I'm a member representative on the board. Thank you.
Kevin O'Daly?
Hi, I'm member representative Herts County Council, and I also sit on the pensions committee observer seat for Unison, and this is my last pensions board. My time is up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Monica?
Morning. I'm a member representative as well. I'm an active member and I'm currently employed by Hertfordshire County Council.
Okay, thank you. I think I spotted at least one standing sub. Have we got any the standing substitutes on the employer side? Terry, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, as you said, I'm Councillor Terry Hone. I am a substitute, but I'm here just to make sure I keep up to speed in case I'm needed. Thank you.
Fine. Rob, is Rob McCarthy here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Rob McCarthy, a substitute employer member of this board. I'm chairman of the Hertfordshire Association of Parish and Town Councils. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. And David Gooden, is David here?
Hasn't made it in so far, Chairman.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, and I suppose I ought to say who I am. I'm Mike Collier. I'm a member representative, a retired employee of Hertfordshire County Council, and I'm currently chair of this board. Okay, and I should say as well that we've got Teresa in the background. She'll keep us on the straight and narrow when necessary. Okay, so if we move on then to the minutes of the last meeting, which is in the agenda pack. Do I have any comments on the minutes? Again, I'll take silence.
Just quickly, will I be signing those when I go back into County Hall next, Teresa?
It could be you or it could be Mike, but I can bring them to you if you'd like. Yes,
that's fine. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm more than happy for you to sign them, Adam, as you're in County Hall far more often than I. So okay. With that, then, are we happy to receive the minutes as a correct record of the meeting? Could I ask you to respond in the chat, please? I should perhaps add that as I was unable to make the meeting, I will abstain from this vote, because I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment there a true record of a meeting I wasn't at. That's agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Then on to item 2, which is the Employer Risk and Governance Report. Anne, I believe you're going to be giving this. Would you like to just briefly say what your role is and then introduce the item, Anne?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning all. My name is Anne and I'm the Senior Pensions Employer Risk and Governance Officer at the Pension Fund. This is the Employer Risk and Governance Report for the quarter October to December 2021. In Section 4, we have analysed scheme employers by risk categories. Red risk rated employers have increased by 1 in the quarter as a result of a new admission agreement requiring signature. The number of employers being monitored under each risk category is outlined in Appendix A. Table 3 provides a breakdown of the 24 scheme employers in the red risk category, with further detail on the progress. The pensions regulator has not been in contact with the fund in respect of the employer reported of a breach due to non-payment of employer contributions. We note that the regulator would not investigate this matter further with the employer, but could intervene to ensure that our governance arrangements are associated with the collection of employer contributions are robust. Fund officers continue to engage with employers with outstanding cessation deficits, and further work is being performed with the actuary ahead of the 2022 fund valuation on how they should be treated. One of the employers in the no indemnity arrangement category is noted to have their contract ceasing within the next 12 months. This employer is still paying contributions, and fund officers have engaged with them to confirm their contract end date. Table 5 highlights the number of outstanding admission agreements each quarter. This quarter, we note that the number of admission agreements remains the same. The performance.
Sorry on that, and apologies to cut across you. I think that's table 4, the number of outstanding agreements on agenda pack, page 19. May have been a different number in the pension committee. Sorry.
Apologies, you are correct. It is table 4. Thank you.
I can count up to 5.
Thank you, Chair. The performance monitor in Appendix C highlights the initial discussions with the auditors regarding the external audit. Details of complaints and IDRPs are outlined in Appendix D, with the number of complaints increasing in comparison with last quarter. Further detail will be discussed in the Project PACE paper. Details of late payers and forms are outlined in Appendix E, with the summary of performance over the last 6 months. Bond policies have also been reviewed by officers, which will be reported and discussed in a later paper. And lastly, the LPPA's performance against their SLAs remains elevated above their target of 95%. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Okay, any questions or comments from anybody? Monica, you have your hand raised, and then Rob. Monica? You're on mute at the moment, Monica. So...
Apologies, I had my hand raised accidentally.
Oh, okay. Rob and then Jolyon.
Right. Thank you, Anne. I mean, this may be the wrong place to raise it, but you're possibly aware that there is a move towards a pension dashboard that members will be able to look at what their entitlements are. Is this a risk that should be taken into account in that employers are going to have to liaise with the fund in order that this can progress? I mean, my understanding is that the fund will need to be live, or is expected to be live on this next year. So time could be quite tight.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I confirm that we have been in discussions with the LPPA's technical team regarding the pensions dashboard, and we will keep the pension board in the loop with any work that we will be doing with our employers.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Jolyon.
Right, thanks for the paper, Anne. I was just wondering, on table 2, which I think is on page 3, there's quite a big increase in the overall number of scheme employers. I mean, happily, they've all gone into the green category, but we've gone from 468 in July to September to 529. I just wondered if there was some particular influx of what was happening there.
Thank you for pointing that out, Jolyon. What we have done this quarter is we have included all of our ceased employers in our reporting going forward. As the LPPA have transferred their risk function over to the Hertfordshire Pension Fund, and we have a bit more of a complete record of the number of total employers we have in the scheme. Nothing significant has changed. We still have about approximately 330 active employers, but this will just assist with the monitoring going forward.
So it's a one-off, they're recognised now, and that's okay, thanks.
Okay, Rob, your hand is still raised. Is your query completed? And then I'll move, if it is, I'll move on to Gail. Rob, you take your hand down, that's fine. Gail.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Anne. Could I just look at your Appendix B, which is Agenda Pack, page 27. This is the Outstanding Admission Agreements Action Plan. I'm just coming to the end of my first term, and I know that throughout that term, we've been very concerned about the outstanding admission agreements, and a lot of progress, much progress has been made on clearing all the backlog. There's just one or two items there that are still there, you know, after 3 years, and the same reason for delay is being given for at least the last 6 months. And I'm just wondering, although I realise this is not material to the scheme as a whole, is this still leaving potential members outside the scheme effectively deferred?
Thank you, Gail. Just to give you a bit of background on the first employer, which has a delay in 39 months. This particular employer is participating in the scheme under an old contract, and those members are required to move on to a new admission agreement. So actually those members in relation to that admission agreement are within the scheme, they are protected and they are paying towards their pension. However, it is an administrative concern, as they shouldn't be participating under the old admission agreement, which doesn't have the protections the new admission agreement have. We are in discussions with the scheme employer and that admission body to transfer them over onto the new agreement, but that particular admission does not pertain to so much of a risk as in comparison with the other ones that are outstanding. The second one, which has been outstanding for 29 months, this particular employer informed us of the outsourcing 2 years following the contract transfer, which immediately put them in that 12 months plus category. As of Q1, which will be reported next quarter, we have threatened deferral for that particular employer. We are hoping that they subsequently sign and we do not need to risk those employees' pensions. However, that is where we stand at the moment.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. Any other questions? Perhaps come in with one of my own then. The items 4 and 5 on that outstanding agreements says that if employer fails to engage, the fund will threaten deferral. Have we noted, have we made the employers aware that that's the next step if they do not engage?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have informed the employers that that is the next stage. A process that we have implemented on all of our admissions. As soon as they inform the fund of an outsourcing, we start that 3-month clock and we attach that admission agreements policy, so they are aware of the dangers that would happen if they do not engage with the fund.
Okay, thank you. I think the other thing that I would like to say is that, as Gail mentioned, this has been a repeated item. However, and again, as Gail acknowledged, it is a lot better than it was, and I think officers are to be commended for their work in continuing to pursue these, and we're grateful that the deferral or the that the deferral threat appears to be working, sad though it is that we have to offer it. If there are no other questions or comments, I invite the board to note the report.
Thank you.
Okay, that's item 2 noted. We move on then to item 3. Rob, are you introducing this one?
Yes, yeah, I am. Good morning.
Okay.
I'm Rob Winterton, the finance manager for the pensions team. I'm presenting today the risk register report for October to December 2021. The register is actually shown as an Appendix A on Agenda Pack 39. Officers have reviewed the register for this period and feel that during this time only one risk has changed in potential impact and severity. This is risk F3, which is Project PACE. It's moved from a yellow risk to an amber risk. Officers felt that the impact of any data issues would be a major impact to the fund. However, we feel that the project is being managed very well by the LPPA, so the possibility of this happening is very unlikely. I've got a bit of text there on paragraph 4.1 of the report, which is Agenda Pack page 37. So basically, yes, the severity impact is now major because it'd be a major issue. However, it's very unlikely that will happen. So overall, it's moved to an amber risk, but we're still pretty happy that Go Live will work with no issues, and John Crowhurst will provide an update on Project PACE later in this meeting. I just wanted to also refer to Agenda Pack page 38, which is the risk dashboard. You'll see that risk B5, which is McLeod, has got a line through it. I've only done this on the dashboard for visual purposes, just to show that the risk referencing goes from B4 to B6 without a break. Risk B5 was actually closed in Q1 because it's now been incorporated with risk F1, which is age discrimination, which looks at McLeod and Sargent. That's all I was really going to say on this report, Chair, but happy to invite questions.
Okay, any questions? No? Okay, just make sure people get the chance. No, okay, if we have no questions then, the pension board is asked to note the contents of the report. Again, if you would respond in the chat function, please. Okay, that item is noted. We move on then to item 4, which is back to you, Anne, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the changes made to the fund's administering authority's discretion policy, as well as provide an update on the review of other relevant policies. The administering authority must formulate and publish a discretions policy to ensure a consistent approach to regulations that the authority has discretion on how to apply. Some of those discretions require a written policy, of which abatement is one. Abatement can apply where a member is in receipt of their pension and re-enters employment with access to the local government pension scheme. If the fund's policy is to abate, this means that pensions built up prior to 1st April 2014, plus their new salary, must not exceed the salary used to calculate their pension. If it does, then the pension can be reduced or even extinguished. During the pandemic, the LGA instructed the funds to relax their abatement policies so they do not deter key persons returning to work to support the national efforts. The current policy, which was approved at the last committee, is to abate, the previous policy was to abate. However, following review of several other funds' approach to abatement and to create a consistency with the LGPS 2014 regulations, the pension fund have now decided to remove abatement from the 1st of April 2022, and pensions that have been abated prior to this date will be reinstated. The Academy's pooling policy, the Town and Parish Council's pooling policy, and the pension fund's voluntary fixed rate policy have been reviewed and updated by fund officers and shared with the actuary for final review and comment. The fund's administration strategy will be reviewed in accordance with the pensions regulator's new single code of practice, expected to be laid before Parliament in March 2022, and will reflect the changes and processes and procedures following the implementation of LPPA's new pensions administration system. It is expected that this strategy will be presented at the July Committee and July Pensions Board. Officers are currently working with specialist advisors to refresh our communication strategy, setting out the fund's objectives, goals, and strategies for engaging with our stakeholders and how we will measure our success. It is expected that this strategy will be presented at the October board. Thank you, and I welcome your question.
Chair, you're muted.
Thank you. Right, I'm now unmuted. Monica, I saw a hand briefly raised. Did you have a question? In that case, I'll go on to Jolyon.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Anne, again. I just had a quick question on the abatement change in policy, and I support the approach that's taken. I just wanted to double check. I've always thought abatement's a bit weird because people have built up a pension that's funded and there's money there to pay it. But if they go back to work, their pension gets reduced or can get reduced. And the only thing that really benefits out of that is the pension fund saves some money that it was expecting to pay out. Is there any financial downside or something hidden that could come into play here? Because otherwise it's a bit of a no-brainer. I see no real reason not to support it. I just wondered if there's any actual hidden sting in the tail about paying out the pension as it's earned, and then also allowing the person to earn whatever money they're building up through being salaried again.
Sure, thank you, Jolyon, for your question. Previously, abatement, we believe it was supposed to target individuals who had built a very successful career in local government, such as chief executives, who will decide to leave, get a really good leave-in package, and then subsequently decide to join another local authority, get the benefit of a really large and good pension, as well as gaining another salary. So I believe that abatement was supposed to sting individuals in that nest. However, it has been affecting other individuals, which it wasn't supposed to affect. So that was really the key change here. However, I think Patrick might want to add a bit of insight to that.
That's correct, Anne. What Anne has said is correct, and I think the policy had a detrimental effect on the lower salaried officers that retired, had a pension, and then for maybe financial reasons wanted to go back into work, and their natural choice of employment would be in a local government. And so we have done a lot of research on this, talking to other funds. Some funds still have abatement policies in place, but I think the LGA, when the pandemic came in, evolved. The LGA gave a clear instruction to all authorities to remove abatement, and that was because of what Anne said earlier, to allow officers, retired officers who wanted to support frontline services, to come back into the employment of local authorities. The discussion was similar discussion, Jolyon, at the Pensions Committee last week, but they were all very supportive of this action, and I think it makes a lot of common sense.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that.
Can I just come on the back of that? I appreciate, again, I'm supportive, and I appreciate this is simply paying out pension that has been earned and will be funded. But you made reference to backdating this for those where abatement has previously been taken. Do we have an idea of how much that is likely to cost the fund?
Presently, we do not have a cost indication, but we are discussing this with the LPPA.
Right. I certainly would welcome a report back to this board at some stage in the future, and I don't within that withdraw my support or anything, but because I'm convinced it should be minimal, and as we've said, it will have already been factored in and financed.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other hands raised? Gail, are you Is your hand raised? I see Patrick's.
Yes, just a quick point, Chair. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne, and I echo the sentiment of supporting this. Could I just clarify what it is that we're looking at? Paragraph 3.7 refers to, that's on Agenda Pack 48, refers to Appendix A. Is that Appendix A, that hasn't been amended then? That is the previous position? There's some highlighted wording on it which appears to suggest that abatement is happening. Or have I got the wrong end of the stick?
Which page are you referring to within
Well,
that?
Chairman, can I assist?
Yes, you can help. Yes,
thank you.
I believe Appendix A is the full list of discretions that the authority has, and Appendix B is the abatement policy, which is one discretion within all those discretions referred to in Appendix A. There are a number of discretions that officers and the administering authority have with respect to pensions. Some of them are in respect of the award of death grants, survivors' pensions. And so this is one particular, the abatement policy is one particular discretion that we thought needed to be highlighted because of what we are actually doing with respect to removing abatement and introducing this. Just to be clarify a point that Anne made, when we talk about removing abatement for members that have got abated pensions at the moment, the intention is not to go back and retrospectively increase the pensions to what they should have been, because the policy in play at the time was to abate.
Okay, that's fine. Gail, did you want to come back?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. No, I just think Appendix A is more than I thought it was. That I see there's highlighted matters there, and I thought perhaps the highlighted matters there were what we were expected to be approving, but in fact it is just the abatement policy that we're, well, not approving, obviously we can't approve it, but that we're noting.
That's the specific one, and in fact the abatement policy, I've just found it, is on page 68.
Is the separate one, and that's what we're considering here. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Just a note to add, which may help with the understanding Appendix A. The reference, the cells that Gail referenced in regards to the highlighting, some of those discretions have been highlighted because the administering authority can exercise those if the employer has been made defunct.
Right.
That's the only clarification there. Thank you.
Right, okay.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions, I think I just need to amend the recommendation slightly in that has been made, we do not approve in this board. So I suggest that we take out the word approves and just add and. So it reads, the pension board notes the amendments to the administering authority's discretions policy and the content of the abatement policy, and notes the policies will be presented at a later date. It's probably too many ands in there, and I'm sure somebody can tidy it up, but as long as we are all aware of the intention. So with that, I invite everybody to vote within the chat function.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so that recommendation as amended is duly noted. We move on then to item 5, and Rob, over to you again.
Thank you. Okay, so the Treasury management strategy comes before committee and board every year, and it sets out the strategy for how we manage operational cash for the pension fund. Due to regulation, we cannot commingle pension fund cash with corporate council cash, so we have a separate strategy for how we manage the council's day-to-day balancing, and then one for the fund. This strategy sets out the background as to why we are required to do this under regulation, and that's shown in paragraph 4 which is Agenda Pack 78. Also on Agenda Pack 78, paragraph 5 shows the position of how much money we had as at the 31st of December 2021. Paragraph 7, Agenda Pack page 79, details the cap for the fund's benchmark allocation for cash held by the administrating authority for cash flow purposes. This is 1% of the total pension fund assets as per the most recent set of audited accounts. The cap is required to be increased to 59 million for 2022-23. This is an increase from 48 million in last year's strategy, and this is because as at the 31st of March 2021, the value of the fund was 5.9 billion. It is very unlikely, but if cash balances get towards this level, we'll definitely have a conversation with our external consultant about advice on how we should reduce this cash and whether we should move it into other asset classes. This advice would then be shared with the chairman and the chief financial officer for sign off and agreement at pension committee. Appendix A on Agenda Pack page 81 sets out the policy and the institutions that we will lend to and the limits of lending and credit ratings that these are managed, or this is how we manage the counterparties against. The operational cash is used for paying pensions and payments of invoices. And then any investment tends to be only in short-term deposits with banks and money market funds. The cap and strategy was agreed at pension committee on the 3rd of March 2022. That's all I was really going to say on this strategy, but happy to take questions.
Okay, any questions? Could I perhaps then start by stating what I think is correct, but I just like that reassurance that there's nothing within our existing policies that would lead us to be investing in anything that's caught by the current sanctions on Russia and the various oligarchs.
So we, I think Patrick's going to jump in here.
Yeah. So within the operational cash that's managed for the purposes of paying pensions and invoices and some commitments to private equity, there is no exposure to Russian assets. Within the actual pension fund, we have an exposure of just about £5 million in total of the whole fund assets of 6.2 billion. Those are in government bond stocks, Russian government stock, and some Belarus stock as well. There was discussion at the pensions committee about this last week. All our managers have been actively trying to limit exposure. However, if you have government stock in your portfolio, you need to have an active market and you have to have a purchaser, and that doesn't exist at the moment. There is some emerging market equities that we have and where there is an exposure to Russia, and I think that was about 2 million. Those have all been written down to zero value, and those particular Russian companies have been removed from the index, the FTSE index, emerging markets index, and the MSCI, which is another index. So they've been removed completely. So the exposure is minimal. None of our active managers have any investments in Russia. However, there will be no doubt companies that they're invested in that are removing operations from Russia. So you'll be familiar with some of the big companies, the motor car companies, BMW, Volkswagen have made announcements, McDonald's. I think most companies who value their market brand will be trying to limit their exposure to Russia and having their brand in that country. So with respect to access as well, that's the pool that we are in. There's a similar story there, that it is minimal exposure and it's mainly through passive management, and inevitably you will have that because of the nature of the index. If Russia was in the index, you will have a small exposure to that country.
Thank you, Patrick. And as you say, the relative size of it to the overall fund is minimal, and we do start in a favourable position, being more than 100% funded at the last valuation. So I think that's reassuring. Terry, I think I see your hands up.
Yeah, sorry, I know I'm only a substitute here, but as a council,
no one only, Terry.
Okay, I'm getting inquiries from residents regarding what investments we have through the pension funds in Russia and Belarus as well. Could I ask if it's possible for Patrick just to publish a document, perhaps to councillors, to make them all aware, a very short document, please, Patrick, on what we have and what we're doing about it for Russia, Belarus, etc. Investments in the pension fund. Just one document to all councillors, please, will be very, very helpful.
Sorry, apologies, I put my microphone on. I can get my officers to pull that together. So it will be these government stocks that I referred to, which are and some emerging market companies that we're invested in. So we can provide that document sometime next week.
Can I go
Thank you very much.
Members of this board, please, Patrick?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? No, in that case, the board's invited to note the contents of the report. Okay, that report is duly noted. We move on then to item 6, and I think we've got John to talk to this. Are you there, John?
Yeah, morning, Chairman. Hi, everyone.
Sorry, John, could you perhaps just explain who you are for the benefit of anyone that doesn't know you?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, morning, everyone. I'm John Crowhurst. I'm the Commercial Director at LPPA, who provide the Pensions Administration Service to Hertfordshire Pension Fund and the County Council.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you. I'm probably going to split my update into 2 sections. The first being relatively brief, and then I'll take questions, which is the performance report, which covers the period October to December 2021. So the performance against the SLAs was good, 98.3% overall against the target of 95%. The number of ongoing cases in the pensions administration system reduced significantly during Q3, so it was 500 overall, reduction from 5595 to 5095. That continued into Q4, and obviously you'll see that in the next local pension board meeting. But our aim has been to reduce the number of ongoing cases before we migrate the data across to the new pensions administration system. So that's moving in the right direction. Help desk wait times were below the aspirational target of 4 minutes during the period. Satisfaction scores across both calls and retirements were in excess of 85%, which was good. And your data quality scores remain steady, with your common data score at 94.1% and your conditional data score at 96.1%. Just to mention on the common data score, we did undertake an activity with the fund to try and trace some missing addresses that we had for deferred members. So that exercise has been ongoing and will be completed during Q4. So in the next performance report, you'll probably see an improvement in the common data score as a result of that activity. And similarly with the conditional data score, now that we've concluded a number of ongoing projects, one of those being the GMP reconciliation exercise, there are still errors that remain. So we're investigating those with the fund to see what needs to be done to improve the score even further. But overall, in a good position on the data quality. So, Chairman, I was going to pause there before I move on to the more topical agenda item, which is probably Project PACE update.
Okay, thank you. Gail, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Just a couple of quick points that John has just raised. One is on the common data score. What do we do? There are a few actual pensions in payment where we don't know the NI numbers or we don't have the addresses? How can we deal with those? How do we know that we're paying real people?
Yeah, I think, Gail, between LPPA and the pension fund, we probably just need to identify who they are, because I'm sure that the national insurance numbers are available between the two parties. If not, we can contact the members themselves, but I suspect we'll be able to track down what the national insurance numbers are. They're probably temporary national insurance numbers anyway. We just need to find out what the actual NI number is.
And the addresses. Can the matter of addresses be traced?
Yeah, the same for the pensioner addresses, and in particular, actually, the active addresses. Obviously, these are participating employers in the fund, so we can certainly reach out to those employers and ask them to provide up-to-date addresses for those members. So we can certainly undertake that activity. As I say, more recently, we have focused on the exercise to try and trace the deferred addresses. But yeah, you're completely right, Gail. There's other things that we can be doing proactively to reduce the number of queries there.
Perhaps, John, you might come back to a future meeting, perhaps the next meeting, and just give us an idea of what the programme on that would be.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Okay.
And
sorry, yes, Gail.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to add just a little further clarification. Again, John raised the question of the GMP reconciliation and rectification exercise. Could you just confirm, John, did that include equalisation, or is that a separate exercise that has to happen now?
It's a separate exercise, Gail.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got Sarah and then Rob.
Hello, thank you. Yes, John, on page 8 of the item 6, appendix 1, under the header leavers, my question is, why are there so many pending leavers with employers? You've got a total of current leavers 425 and 421 of those are pending with employers for further information.
Yeah, so at the last year end, we would have identified a number of leavers to the pension fund, and obviously we've been trying to chase employers to submit that information to us. The main employer in the fund is obviously the county council, and we actually work closely with Serco to get the leaver information directly from the payroll system. So anything that is related to the main employer, we are clearing down before we do the valuation exercise. I think one of the challenges on the leavers is that because we only collect and reconcile the data on an annual basis currently, and we don't know what we don't know until we process the year-end file. So I suspect that when we get the files in during April, we'll identify another spike in leavers, and then we'll be speaking to employers about getting that information in. Obviously, when we move to UPM, the intention will be that we move to monthly submissions from May, which will hopefully start to improve the overall score. But I'm not too concerned about that number, because I know that the teams are working proactively with some of those employers, and obviously we'll flag to the pension fund any that we need probably, some support with engaging on. So yeah, I think we just need to try and resolve those before the valuation submission, which will be around July time.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps I could ask John whether it might be appropriate that you give us an update, perhaps not at the next meeting, but at the meeting after, just where you're going, and so that we can start from this 421 and see that we're at least going in the right direction.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it'll be in the report. But yeah, I think what we'll do outside of the meetings, we'll flag with officers any employers that we need to work closer with.
That's very helpful. Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. John, can you give an update on where you are with preparations for the pensions dashboard? My understanding is that larger employers, or larger funds rather, will need to be going live next year, and presumably this is another job you're having to deal with.
Yes, it is, Rob. So our technical team are leading on the exercise with regards to the pension dashboard, and I know that we've held some round tables with clients, and I know that Hertfordshire were included in that. And I think that was recently that activity happened. There is a consultation out at the moment with regards to the pensions dashboard that our risk and compliance function will be responding to. And what we would normally do is share our response as LPPA with clients. And obviously, I'm sure the pension fund is probably producing a response as the pension fund. So we'll share what the consultation response is, and then maybe again for the next meeting we can probably give a better indication as to what the timeline looks like and what activity needs to be undertaken between the fund, obviously LPPA and our system supplier, because obviously they'll be supporting some of the activity on this.
Yeah, this is something on which regular updates would be useful, I think.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay.
Thanks,
Any more questions on that part of John's report? Okay, in that case, John, I invite you to carry on and tell us later on pace.
Yeah, so Project Pace. So we did go live at the end of January with free clients, which was about 58,000 members that we went live with at the end of January. And then at the end of February, we added our fourth local government fund, which was another 92,000 members. So we've got about 150,000 members on the new system at the moment. Hertfordshire remains on track to go live on the 24th of this month, which will add another 120,000 members to the new system. So in terms of what we've learned so far, so when we went live in January, we had 67 of our operational staff trained and processing work in UPM. So that included 33 people from our operational teams, 9 payroll experts and 25 of our help desk advisors. And by the time Hertfordshire goes live at the end of March, we'll have over 100 of our operational staff trained to use the system. So all of the employers across the clients that have gone live were offered training and support, particularly around the employer portal. And we've had well over 500 forms submitted by those employers since go live. What we've started to do now, and we'll do the same for Hertfordshire, is we're looking at the run rate, so to see whether or not we're still receiving a similar number of forms that we were pre-go live as we were post-go live, because the risk is that that there's a backlog storing up or employers are not using the new portal. So we'll be flagging that and highlighting all of the engagement activity that we'll do to support that. On the member portal pension point, we've had over 5,000 members successfully register across the 4 clients. And we continue to communicate the new portal with the 4th client over the next three weeks. Our operational teams have been processing payments in the new system, so transfers to other pension schemes, lump sum payments, refunds, and we completed our first pension payroll run at the end of February, and that was successful as well, which is good. So in terms of preparing for the Hertfordshire go live, there's a number of there's quite a lot of activity that needs to take place, including a go no go decision making process. So what happens is our steering group on the project will make an initial recommendation to go or no go to our change and technology committee. That includes things like the data migration having been fully reconciled, calculations working and tested, portals ready, and employers having been given their new registration details. That system performance is good, stability. So what I mean by that is that we can have 100 users logged in simultaneously running bulk processes and calculations, and the system is secure and doesn't fall over. That all of the reports that we need to manage the operation on your behalf and all the reports that we need to provide you as a pension fund are available, and that our comms and engagement is prepared and ready to go across both members and employers. What we will do from an operational readiness perspective, what we're trying to do for Hertfordshire, and we've achieved this for the other clients, but they're smaller in size, is that we are trying to get ahead of the contractual due dates. So we won't on day one have a lot of work sitting there that has to be processed on that day to hit the SLA. We'll hopefully have a 3 or 4 day buffer. That doesn't mean that we won't be processing on day one, but it just gives us that breathing space so that our staff can become familiar with the system and get up to speed. There were some lessons learned from the first go live. I'll quickly cover those. The first was the visibility of all of the images in the system. So it was always planned to be a post go live activity where all of the images would be migrated across an index to the member records. When we tested that load, we anticipated that it would take 2 days to get everything in. The reality was it probably took nearly 3 weeks to get all of the images into the new system. Now, it wasn't a problem for processing work because we still had access to the legacy systems, but it was an inconvenience, I think, for our operational staff. So what we've done for Hertfordshire is we've already loaded the images into UPM, and we have to index them after we go live, after we've taken the final data cut. So it'll be a lot quicker, and the images should be available within a couple of days, which is good. For our staff to access the system, it's in the cloud. So there's a 2-factor authentication process, and we had challenges with people being able to log in on day one previously, which wasn't ideal. So what we did with the second drop in February is everyone logged in the day before we went live and made sure they had access, and we'll do the same for Hertfordshire. Not all of the letters were configured and in the system at the first go live, and these were infrequent letters that were being used, but obviously naturally there is always going to be a scenario where you reach a process that needs that letter. All of those letters now in the system, so for when Hertfordshire go live, they're all there and ready to be used. And there's something that I think is a live event and still to be aware of is the call wait times into our help desk. So we did flag with officers that we did anticipate our wait times would increase. We are doing a lot of communications to members, in particular around pension point. So the wait times, the average wait time increased to around 15 minutes. What we've done recently, so this is in the last 2 weeks, we have changed the way that we direct the calls into the help desk. So we've got a separate line for people ringing specifically about the member portal, because we've got members that are contacting us about that, and we've got members contacting us about retirements, reporting bereavements, want progress updates on their case, and we don't want those people waiting for a long time in the queue. So we've separated the way that we handle that. It has brought the wait times down slightly, down to about an average of 9 minutes now. So it's not down to the levels that we were at previously, but we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And obviously we'll be providing the fund with regular updates on the performance of the help desk. If the pension board does receive anything that's escalated to them, any of the county councillors do receive anything, then obviously do pass them across to us, escalate them to me and my team, and we will make sure that members are responded to. It's just unfortunate that we are experiencing some of those longer wait times at the moment, and we'll do everything that we can to try and manage that. Last couple of things, and then I'll take questions. So when we go live with Hertfordshire, we will be going live remotely. So our staff are still working from home predominantly. What we found very useful post go live with the other 2 drops is that we have 3 daily calls with Civica, who are our new system suppliers. We have one in the morning, one at lunchtime, and one late afternoon to make sure that any hypercare issues or defects are being prioritised and they are being resolved. So that's worked very well. What we've also done is we have our dedicated teams on calls throughout the day. So imagine our retirements team, we've got 20 people that are familiar with UPM and the processes, and we're going to add another 5 people. They'll be on a Teams call like this throughout the day, probably on mute and cameras off. But if there's a query, they'll be able to quickly come on and say, I've got this issue in the process. Can anyone help? And we found that's really, really proactive in resolving some of the live queries that are coming up. And the last thing is, I just wanted to flag again that the product that we've gone live with is very much out of the box. It was an aggressive go live timeline. We had a lot of feedback from both Civica and other large LGPS funds that said, don't try and do too much too soon with the product. Don't try and configure everything. Don't try and go live with all the bells and whistles, because you'll learn so much about it and you'll end up reconfiguring things. So what we will be providing the fund with is an overview of all of the functionality that's currently being turned on, and what is planned to go live over the next 12 months. So you'll get some visibility of what that development roadmap looks like, because there are a number of tools that employers can use, and members can track their case, they can retire online, etc. So we're going to give some visibility around what that looks like in the future. So far so good, and we are currently on track, subject to that decision-making process, to go live on the 24th of March. So I'll pause there, Chairman. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Sarah?
Thank you. Hi, John. It was just some questions. As an employer representative, I am actually in the pensions manager at the University of Hertfordshire, so I've attended the training sessions that have been put on for the new UPM, and it was just to say that unfortunately during all 3 of the training sessions there were technical difficulties that the presenters were having with the UPM. They either couldn't get logged in, or they were getting kicked out, or was getting frozen. And it was just a concern really that will we as employers experience, can we expect to experience issues initially with the like connection issues and things like that, or do you envisage that by the time we get our hands on it in a couple of weeks' time it should be resolved? So that was I've got a couple of questions. That was question 1.
Okay, take that one, John.
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, so you're completely right, Sarah. So there have been issues reported from employers that have gone live already. A lot of those have been resolved now. So obviously we'll be making sure through the testing of the portal for Hertfordshire employers before we go live that some of those issues are not there anymore. So I'm hoping that there'll be less. Civica have been really responsive in responding to anything that we can't configure and fix ourselves. What I will say is that we will be making it very clear to employers what the support network looks like at LPPA. So who do you escalate things to? Who is your main point of contact, so that you're not waiting for days to be able to get things resolved and get access to the portal. So we'll make that very clear on what that support looks like, and hopefully there won't be as many issues as you saw when the training was being delivered. So I do acknowledge that there were some issues, but I do know that a lot of those have been resolved now.
Okay, thank you. And yes, so my other question would be, so having gone on the training sessions and seen what the new joiner and leaver forms look like, unfortunately to me it appeared like the forms were a step backwards. They you had to do more manual calculations with figures that you're giving on there, and you also had to manually put in what contribution rate it should be, whereas before on the previous system it worked that out for you. And it was just a concern that, is this going to open up more area for mistakes if you're expecting employers to manually work out certain figures and bits like that? You're going to get more errors, and it's just then going to be a question of, is this the best way to gather data? And it was just a question of, is there going to be development on those forms? Because at the moment they look quite basic as to the information you're asking for.
Okay. Yeah, no problem, Sarah. So I think what will be useful, and I'll try and fast track this a little bit more at our end, is to give some visibility around what functionality we have gone live with and what opportunities there are to develop, I suppose, the forms, or what has been developed and we just haven't launched yet. So I think that'll probably be useful for us to share. What I will say is, when you do start using them, so if you can give us the feedback to Tony Grime, our employer engagement manager, because we are collating any suggestions that come back. And Civica, I'm not going to say they're going to develop everything that everyone suggests, because that would be unrealistic, but they are willing to listen to feedback from a new group of employers that are using the system. So I think we can probably work together on that. So any feedback you've got, please do send it across. What was the second question? Sorry.
So there's I've got one final question about this. Really, is that a big issue that was noted by other people that were in the training session as well, was that you can't view submitted forms, and the trainers on the that were giving the training, they didn't have a fixed date of when this was going to be resolved. And it seems like quite a big issue that if we had a query coming back, we couldn't look back and say, okay, we've given this information, because there's no way to save a copy of what you've submitted.
Right. Yes, you are right. I do believe I think we've got a date now, because I know that was flagged as a priority 1 by us to Civica. So I'll feed that back to officers on what the delivery date for that is. There is a lot of functionality in the employer portal around how we can interact and resolve queries that isn't turned on at the moment. But we will be, we're not, because after the March go lives, the next group of clients go live in September, October. So we're going to be spending the next few months, looking at the development roadmap and what we can launch. Well, the other thing I was going to mention, sorry, to your first question, was with regards to the forms being more basic, I suppose, as you're saying, there's probably more more validation at your end. I think if we can get to a position where we're getting monthly returns, it will actually remove the need for you to submit as many forms, which will obviously save time on both sides. But yeah, any feedback that you can give us once you get your hands on the portal in a couple of weeks' time, we'll give you some visibility around what we can do in the short term and what realistically is going to be more medium to long term.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Can I ask one related to the next valuation that we've got thundering down the tracks? Are you confident that you're still going to be able to provide all the necessary information to our actuaries for the valuation, which is due at the end of this month?
Yeah, well, yes. So with that, what we're planning to do, Chair, is employers will be able to submit the year-end file in the same format that they have done in previous years. So we're not asking for short-term configuration to get the files to us. So we'll have the files. We've got a converter that we can use to upload it into UPM, and obviously we've got a number of year-end processes that have been tested and are ready to do what we would normally do as part of the year-end process. What we've also been doing with your fund actuary is talking about the valuation timetable, and we've actually scheduled. Normally, we would provide the valuation extract file in around the July date. We are going to produce an interim file at the end of April, which will be March 2021's data, to make sure that the actuary is comfortable with the way the data is migrated across. Because obviously that's the key, is to make sure that the integrity of the data is being maintained. And I think as long as employers submit the files to us by the normal deadline, which is the end of April, then we'll be fine producing the usual information that the actuary needs to complete the exercise. And the other thing that I'll mention on the data integrity is the pension regulator common and conditional data scores. We are running them in parallel as well. So once we've gone live, we'll check the scores to make sure that they look as we expect them to.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, we're invited to note the content of the report. Okay, that is duly noted, which moves us on to item 7, which is the Government Actuary Section 13 report. Patrick, are you starting off with this one and then coming over to Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to briefly introduce this. This is a regulatory requirement whereby all funds, all LGBS funds, are required to provide to the Government Actuary Department data that was used at each valuation. So for the purposes of this report, it will be the last valuation in 2019. What the Government Actuary does is looks to ensure that funds complied with all the regulations and to look for any outliers in the data sets. One or 2 points that have been particularly picked out by the Government Actuary Department that they've asked the Scheme Advisory Board to look at is the treatment of academies within the LGPS funds. Some funds pool academies, some don't. And they've also looked at particular funds where there have been concerns about solvency, contributions, and the leverage of those contributions to the liabilities within the fund. But to be absolutely clear, the Government Actuary Department didn't find any funds that weren't complying with the regulations. I'll hand it over to Barry and let him introduce himself, and he can go through the detail.
Over to you, Barry.
Thanks, Chairman.
Actually, maybe you could just briefly, for those who don't know you, explain your role, please.
Yes, will do. Hi, I'm Barry Dodds. I'm one of the fund actuaries at Hymans Robertson. So Hymans Robertson are the appointed fund actuary for your pension fund. I work alongside Catherine, whose name is on the front of this report, which is hence the confusion. but I will be presenting this report today, and also the reports that are for some subsequent Part 2 agenda items today as well. Okay. So this report really starts on agenda pack page 150. Patrick's kind of covered some of the background, but I'll just kind of add a little bit to that. So section 13 is kind of how this is referred to. Section 13 report is basically the Government Actuaries Department was appointed to carry out this analysis of all the LGPS funds in England and Wales to address various different assessments of, as Patrick said, kind of compliance, consistency, solvency, and long-term cost efficiency. Now, this is all based on the 2019 valuations, which was the last full valuations that were done. And GAD published their kind of report just prior to Christmas last year. So it does take a while to pull this together, and all the funds, once they've completed their 29 valuation, submitted all the data and reports to GAD in order for them to start their analysis. So in terms of compliance, yes, the idea is that GAD checks that all of the funds complied with the regulations. There's also the consistency angle, that actually the way that the valuations were carried out were consistent from one fund to the next. I'll come on to a bit more about that shortly. And as Patrick pointed out, the valuation is the idea is that GAD are checking that the employer rates ensure that there's going to be solvency and long-term cost efficiency. Around solvency, it's about, is there going to be enough assets to actually pay out the benefits? And in terms of cost efficiency, it's kind of around intergenerational fairness, and is there movements in contribution rates that are going to potentially unfairly impact future generations. Moving to agenda pack page 152. So what did GAD actually kind of report back? So compliance, as Patrick noted, they came back and said, yes, all the funds complied with the regulations in terms of their valuation. So that was a first tick. It's gladly an easy one. Consistency. There was a dashboard in each valuation report for each fund at the 2019 valuation, which contained all the same information. So the idea was that allowed some consistency and allowed an outsider to view independently how one fund compared to another as part of the valuation process. So they did acknowledge that and welcomed the inclusion of that in the valuations. They did, as Patrick mentioned, comment on the academies and how academies are treated across different funds. Now, that's something which is a little bit of a surprise to us, given that it's not strictly speaking a kind of valuation issue. It's more they were raising how academies are treated for funding purposes in general, but also how they were treated when they converted to academies from being a kind of maintained school. So this is something which has obviously been happening for a number of years now. Academies schools have been converted into academies for a number of years. There wasn't specific guidance at the time as to how that should happen. So kind of logically, you would see that maybe different funds would take different approaches, and indeed different funds have different kind of procedures in place. And run slightly differently, so that there was every chance that there was going to be some inconsistency in terms of how academies were created, if you like, from a LGPS perspective. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. It's obviously, given the number of academies that have already been created and converted into and created within LGPS funds as employers within funds, it's obviously little bit kind of after the horse is bolted, if you like, to try and ensure consistency now. And so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, and I struggle to see how they're going to create consistency going forward that could be kind of rectified retrospectively for academies that have already been created. So it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out. GAD also raised issues about McLeod and climate risk for this coming valuation, and are looking to see consistency across the board in terms of how McLeod and climate risk are treated. Be easier in terms of McLeod because there's a much better idea of what the McLeod remedy is now, and so it's much easier to have a consistent approach in terms of how that's treated for valuation purposes. Climate risk, it's slightly different kettle of fish, so there is a chance that different funds take slightly different approaches, but I think all funds will be going down the route of allowing for it and analysing how robust their funding strategies are to different potential future climate outcomes. So moving on to Agenda Pack page 153, there's a GAD have a kind of flag system of anything that pops up that's a concern for them, for any of the funds that they were looking at. So there's a kind of red, amber, white and green. In terms of across the board, solvency, they've seen generally assets have grown considerably since the previous valuation. Liabilities amounted to 296 billion, and actually that kind of the aggregate funding level of the LGPS as a whole moved from 85% up to 98%, largely due to the really good investment returns over that 3-year period. So in general, on solvency, there was no flags raised by GAD because all the funds had seen a significant improvement in funding level. In terms of long-term cost efficiency, there were some flags raised by GAD on this for a few funds. So they raised amber flags against 4 funds, and for 2 of those funds, GAD were concerned that the overall contribution rate was too low. And for the other 2 funds, they were concerned that the employer contribution rates overall had gone down without the kind of the period over which they were being treated for kind of recovering any deficit having gone down. That's something we're kind of in ongoing conversation with GAD about the second item of these, because our view and indeed the view of the other actuarial consultancies as well that are involved with the LGPS is that there isn't a kind of single deficit recovery period that you have to keep shortening every valuation, because that would lead to very volatile contribution rates if you're shortening the period by 3 years every 3. And you're going to be in a situation where if there's a very quickly, and that would lead to big jumps in contribution rates. And our view is that this is an open scheme. We've got long term. We're looking at this over the long term, decades into the future, with active members still contributing. We don't see any need to have a continually shortening period of time over which you're addressing any kind of deficit that's sitting there. So that's conversations that are ongoing with GAD, and that'll develop no doubt over the period until they look at this year's valuations. So that's on long-term cost efficiency. If we actually, that's kind of just general background and the results across the board. Your specific fund results, if you look at Agenda Pack page 156, there's a table which you probably have to kind of zoom in to really see every single fund, but we've tried to point out where yours sits there. So on the left-hand side, the column on the left is basically the ranking of how well funded each fund was on their local basis, so on their specific assumptions that were used by their actuary at the time. So you see Hertfordshire there, kind of above the midpoint there, 37th at 98% funded. Now on the right-hand side, what the Government Actuaries Department do is they restate essentially the results for every fund on just one set of assumptions, because obviously each individual fund's own assumptions will vary from one to the other for various reasons. Some of the main ones being the investment strategies will vary from one fund to the next, and so what you're expecting in investment return going forward will vary, and therefore that would be one of the key assumptions that will differ from one fund to the next. What the Government Actuaries Department is trying to do is saying, if we just assumed they all had the same, potential investment return going forward. What would the results look like? What they also do is their assumptions are a kind of what they call best estimate. So the kind of your best guess at what the assumptions might be. There's no prudence built into those. Whereas for all the ones down the left-hand side, there is a requirement for us to build in prudence. So there's a requirement under the regulations for our assumptions to be more prudent, which is why you'll see it should be in all the cases, your position on the left-hand side in terms of the 98% funding in your case is actually equivalent to 121% funded on GAD's basis, because they've removed any prudence from that calculation. So as you can see, you actually jump up in the rankings on GAD's basis compared to the other funds in general. And what that's kind of saying is that, saying a couple of things. It's saying that you would expect your funding level, as I mentioned before, to jump up because they're using a best estimate basis and removing any prudence. What it's also saying is that actually your funding basis, there are other funds out there with a less prudent funding basis than yours. And that's not to say that's wrong in terms of their prudence levels. There will be funds out there that are in a position where they have to kind of chase returns to make sure they've got enough cash to pay the benefits in the long term. So there will be funds that have slightly less prudent assumptions than yours. But generally, what we're seeing here is a kind of good result from Hertfordshire's perspective. Shows that you're well funded in comparison to everybody else, and sitting kind of where you would want to be in these tables. Agenda pack page 157 shows a kind of slightly different view of those results on GAD's basis. We've picked out exactly where Hertfordshire's little dot is on this chart, and so basically what this chart's showing is that you're above average in terms of the funding level relative to the overall average of the LGPS, and that you're kind of in the middle of the pack where it comes to the average contribution rate that's being paid. The next page, so agenda pack page 158, has some other summary metrics that that GAD also released as part of the report, of varying use, I would say, but some quite interesting. So funding level, as we discussed, 121% using GAD's kind of consistent basis across everybody. Maturity of 6.8, that essentially is what GAD's trying to measure there is a level of maturity is the kind of the amount of liabilities that a fund has in comparison to the payroll of the active members, so this kind of salaries of the active members. Now, obviously, contribution rates are generally paid as a percentage of the payroll, percentage of salaries, and so that kind of gives a measure of how robust the fund would be to kind of any changes in liabilities. The higher the payroll, so the lower the maturity, so the kind of the more immature a fund is, the better it's able to deal with kind of big changes in liabilities, because you've got a big payroll there sitting to be able to kind of be a buffer, if you like, in terms of contributions coming in. So obviously, if you've got quite high liabilities but quite low payroll, then any change in liabilities can have a big difference, big change in your percentage of payroll contribution rate that needs to change. So you're sitting in a good position there. You're kind of 77th, which is good in terms of it's what we might call kind of immature in comparison to quite a lot of the other funds. So you're in a good position there where you've got quite a good amount of payroll in terms of ratioing that to your liabilities. The required return figure there, GAD work out kind of what they think your required return would be to be 100% funded. So that's kind of up in the 16th, which is again good. It shows you're in a good funding position, and the return scope figure there is kind of essentially GAD's measure of how prudent your assumption, or how prudent you are in your assumption on investment returns. The higher that figure is, the more prudent that they deem your funding strategy to be, and that's 1.1% is a kind of relatively high level. It's kind of 44th out of 87, so middle of the pack, but that's a good position to be in. I think that's probably the last slide, but happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Okay, I don't know whether, Patrick, you wanted to add anything before we throw over to questions, or we can go straight to questions.
No, Chairman, I don't have anything to add. Just to echo that, it's a good outcome for the fund, and happy for you to invite questions from colleagues. Okay, I see Jolyon has raised his hand. Jolyon.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that report, Barry. I just wanted to hark back to something you said near the beginning about the difference in the way academies were treated when they were academising. I just wondered if you could remind me. I believe the situation when Hertfordshire schools turned into academies was when Hertfordshire as a whole was less than 100% funded. They were set up with a share of that deficit on the basis that they used to be part of that pot and it was slightly underfunded, so they'd start as slightly underfunded. I just wondered, now that HEC, I presume, has flipped over 100% funded, I'm guessing they don't start with a share of surplus. I'm guessing they just spin out and they start at 100%. I just wanted to confirm that was how it's run.
Yes, so essentially it's slightly more complex than that, in that it's not just taken as, for example, Hertfordshire County Council's funding level overall. What happens is we actually assess the position of the council, or rather the LEA school pool is actually kind of a separate entity within the fund, a separate pool. So we assess the funding level of the pool of LEA schools. And what we do is we say we take off the assets, we take the value of the deferreds and the pensioners to kind of basically safeguard the deferreds and the pensioners that are being left behind by the school. And then we say, well, what's the remaining funding level? So it can be, even if, for example, the LEA schools pool was 100% funded, it might be when you've actually essentially safeguarded the deferreds and the pensioners that it becomes slightly less than 100% funded when you're just looking at the actives and the remaining assets. So there is a slight more complex nature to that calculation, but in general, yes, there is a cap of kind of 100%. If that calculation came out as more than 100% funded, then you would still say the academy is only getting kind of 100% of the liabilities that they're taking across.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I'd like to echo Patrick's comment that it's a pleasing report to read, that not only are we all green, but we're well up the league tables where a high position is good and down where a good position is down. So it's don't think there are any other questions. In that case, I'll move that we note the contents of the report. Can you vote in the usual way, please? Okay, that item is noted. The next item on the part one is the dates of future meetings. They're listed for those of you with a hard copy of the agenda. I just like to point out that there's a meeting on the 11th of October, not the 11th of September, as I believe was initially circulated. So just like to suggest that we note those dates, and whilst I guess we should vote on that in the usual way, whilst we do that, I would say I haven't been notified of any other part one business, but what I would like to do whilst we are in the open session is to note, I mean, Kevin referred at the beginning of the meeting that this will be his last meeting. David Gooden is also standing down, so I'd like to express my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of the whole board, for their contribution, and to wish them well in whatever it is that they do next. So Okay, so that's the dates of the next meetings have been duly noted. So I now move that the public part of this meeting will now end and we enter closed session to consider exempt business.